Nobody spoke Japanese. The billionaire was fuming. Then the maid's black daughter replied perfectly. This was the moment that the chrome and glass empire of Sterling Blackwood began to show its first imperceptible crack, not from a market crash or a hostile takeover, but from the profound and unnerving stillness of a 19-year-old girl standing by the tea service. The silence in the airy, the 90th floor penthouse boardroom of Blackwood Industries was a suffocating high-altitude pressure. It was a silence composed of three distinct elements: the icy, impassive quiet of the Japanese delegation, led by the venerable Mr. Kenji Tanaka, the panicked, heart-thumping quiet of Blackwood's own executive team, and the furious, engine-stalled quiet of Sterling Blackwood himself, a man whose entire existence was a monument to noise, to action, to relentless, percussive success. His face, usually a mask of tanned, predatory confidence, was a blotchy, thunderous red. A vein pulsed at his temple, a frantic metronome counting down the seconds of a deal worth more than the GDP of a small nation. For the last time, Blackwood's voice was a low growl, a serrated edge tearing through the pristine air. Somebody get me a translator, not a machine, a person, a living, breathing person who can explain to Mr. Tanaka why his company is about to miss the single greatest opportunity of the century. His eyes scanned the long obsidian table, a polished void reflecting the grim faces of his lieutenants. They flinched under his gaze, each one a testament to expensive education, and yet, in this moment, utterly useless. The state-of-the-art, AI-powered universal translator, a jewel of Blackwood's own tech division, had crashed spectacularly, spitting out a garbled stream of nonsensical syllables that had caused Mr. Tanaka's eyebrow to arch. A minuscule movement with the tectonic force of a continental shift. "We're trying, Sterling," whispered his COO, a man named Harris, sweat beading on his upper lip. "The consulate line is busy. Every top-tier service is booked. It's the G7 Summit week." "I don't pay you for excuses," Blackwood slammed his palm on the table. The sound was a gunshot in the sterile room. The delicate porcelain teacups, arranged with geometric precision, rattled in their saucers. "I pay you to solve problems. And right now, the problem is that these gentlemen think we are incompetent fools." It was then that his furious gaze, sweeping the room for a target to incinerate, landed on the periphery. Standing near a gleaming refreshment cart was a young woman. She was not one of his team. She wore a simple dark blue dress, practical and unadorned, a stark contrast to the tailored Italian suits and silk blouses that populated his world. Her hair was styled in neat, intricate braids that fell just past her shoulders. She was Amara Washington, and in the rigidly stratified ecosystem of the Eyrie, she was categorized as invisible. She was there only because her mother, Elena, the building's head of household services, and a woman who had served Blackwood with quiet dignity for 2 decades, had a sudden family emergency and had asked her daughter, who was waiting to drive her home, to oversee the final touches of the catering. Amara's only task was to ensure the tea remained at the perfect temperature, and the pastries were immaculately presented. Blackwood saw her not as a person, but as a glitch in the perfection of his environment, a piece of the background that had mistakenly drawn attention to itself. "And who the hell are you?" he snapped, his voice dripping with disdain. "Are you enjoying the show? Get out. The help is supposed to be unseen and unheard." His words were meant to be a dismissal, a casual swatting away of a fly, but Amara did not move. She did not flinch. She did not even blink. She simply stood there, her posture impossibly straight, her hands clasped loosely before her. Her stillness was a rebuke, a quiet counterpoint to his volcanic rage. This infuriated him further. He was a man who moved markets with a word, and this girl, this nobody, was defying the gravitational pull of his command. "Did you hear me?" he said, louder this time, taking a step toward her. His expensive leather shoes squeaked on the marble floor. "This is a private meeting. You don't belong here. Go, polish something." The cruelty was casual, designed to humiliate, to reestablish the order of his universe. His executives shuffled their feet, their gazes fixed on their hands, their expensive watches, anywhere but at the girl. They were complicit in their silence. Across the table, Mr. Tanaka's eyes, deep and dark, shifted from Blackwood to Amara. He observed her, his face a mask of ancient calm, but his focus was absolute. He saw not a maid's daughter, but a pillar of composure in a storm of vulgarity. He saw a young woman who possessed something his host so glaringly lacked: grace. Amara finally moved. She lifted her head, and her eyes met Sterling Blackwood's. They were clear, deep, and held no trace of fear. They held only a quiet, profound disappointment. And in that moment, the fate of the billion-dollar deal was sealed, not by spreadsheets or projections, but by a silent judgment in the eyes of a girl he had already dismissed. The reversal had begun. The fuming billionaire just didn't know it yet. He believed he was asserting his power, but all he was doing was providing the stage for his own undoing. If you believe that true worth lies not in a person's station but in their character, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And be sure to like and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of quiet dignity. The air in the airy grew thick with the unspoken. Sterling Blackwood's outburst, meant to be a final contemptuous assertion of his authority, had instead created a vacuum. Into this vacuum flowed the acute discomfort of his team, the silent, mounting disapproval of the Japanese delegation, and the unwavering, solid-state composure of Amara Washington. She had not spoken, had not moved beyond the slight incline of her head, yet her silence was an active force in the room. It was a mirror, and in it, Blackwood's brutishness was reflected back at him, magnified and distorted into something truly ugly. He had expected her to scurry away, perhaps with a mumbled apology or even tears. That was the expected script, the natural order of his world, the powerful command, the powerless obey. Her refusal to follow this script felt like a personal affront, a tear in the fabric of his reality. His anger, having found no purchase on her, recoiled and began to curdle into something more venomous. "What, are you deaf?" he pressed, his voice losing its booming command and taking on a nasty, sneering quality. He walked closer, invading her space, a tactic of physical intimidation that had served him well in countless negotiations. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, used to making others feel small. Yet Amara did not shrink. She held her ground, her posture as unyielding as a deeply rooted tree. Her stillness was not passive, it was a fortress. From across the room, Leo, a young cater waiter on his first assignment of this magnitude, watched from the doorway, his heart pounding against his ribs. He was terrified for the girl. He had seen Blackwood tear into a senior vice president just that morning over a misaligned chart, reducing the man to a stammering wreck. What he was witnessing now was a different level of cruelty, one directed at someone who couldn't fight back. Or so he thought. He admired her courage, this quiet girl who absorbed the billionaire's fury like a sea cliff absorbs a wave, unmoved, uneroded. He felt a burgeoning protective instinct, quickly suppressed by the cold fear of losing his job. He was a spectator, trapped behind a wall of his own powerlessness. Blackwood gestured around the opulent room at the panoramic views of the city sprawling below, a kingdom he had built. "Look at this room. Do you know what it takes to get here? It takes drive, ruthlessness. It takes an understanding of power, things you, in your simple little life, could never possibly comprehend." He was no longer speaking just to her, but to everyone. He was performing, trying to recast his bullying as a lesson in strength for the benefit of the silent Japanese businessmen. But the performance was falling flat. Mr. Tanaka's gaze remained on Amara, his expression unreadable, but his attention was a tangible thing. He was not watching Blackwood's show of force. He was studying Amara's show of restraint. Tanaka, a man whose entire culture was built upon the nuanced interplay of surface and depth of what is said and what is meant, recognized in the young woman a discipline that was utterly alien to his host. Amara's eyes flickered for a fraction of a second to her hands. They were elegant, slender hands, but a keen observer would notice the faint calluses on the side of her middle finger, the kind one gets not from manual labor, but from holding a pen or a brush for thousands of hours. It was a detail lost on Blackwood, who saw only the plain dress and the dark skin of someone he had mentally filed under staff. Inside, Amara was not a maelstrom of fear or anger. She was a deep, still lake. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory, a calm and resonant timbre that had shaped her world. "True strength, Amara-chan," he used to say, his English gently accented, "is not the power to shout down the world. It is the power to remain yourself when the world shouts at you." She felt the familiar weight of the small, smooth object in her pocket, a worn wooden carving of a crane. She unconsciously brushed her thumb over its surface, a gesture of grounding, of remembrance. Blackwood, mistaking her introspection for fear, pressed his advantage. "I have built an empire. I am negotiating a deal that will change the future of global technology, and you are—" "What?" "Standing here taking up my oxygen." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Your mother, at least, knows her place. She is efficient. She is invisible, a quality you have clearly failed to inherit." The mention of her mother was a deliberate low blow. He wanted to see her crack. He wanted the satisfaction of breaking her composure. But the insult had the opposite effect. It solidified Amara's resolve. This was no longer about her. It was about her mother's 2 decades of silent, thankless service. It was about the dignity that people like Sterling Blackwood sought to strip away from those they deemed beneath them. Her stillness became something denser, heavier. The temperature in the eyrie seemed to drop a few degrees. The unease among Blackwood's executives was now palpable. One of them, a woman in a pearl gray suit, shifted her chair with a soft scrape that sounded like a scream in the quiet room. She could no longer bear to watch. Blackwood had gone too far, and the silent Japanese men were his jury. The tension in the room had been stretched to its breaking point. It was a thin, high-wire hum of imminent disaster. Sterling Blackwood, fueled by a narcissistic rage, was committed to his path of public humiliation. He was a man who only knew how to escalate. Retreat was not in his vocabulary. He turned from Amara to the massive 80-inch screen that dominated one wall of the boardroom. It still displayed the last slide from his failed presentation, a slide dedicated to the concept of the partnership's enduring legacy. At its center was a single bold kanji character, the symbol his team had chosen to represent this idea. It was this character that the faulty translator had stumbled over, setting off the entire catastrophe. "See this?" Blackwood's voice was sharp, a shard of glass. He pointed a dismissive finger at the screen, then jabbed it back in Amara's direction. "This is a Japanese word. It means legacy. It's about building something that lasts, something that matters. A concept I'm sure is quite foreign to you. It's the entire foundation of this deal." He smirked, a cruel twist of his lips. "But I wouldn't expect you to understand. Now, for the final time, get out of my sight." He turned his back on her, a gesture of ultimate dismissal, assuming the confrontation was over and he had won. The room held its breath, waiting for the sound of her retreating footsteps. Instead, a voice, quiet but preternaturally clear, sliced through the oppressive silence. "That is not the correct word." The statement was simple, declarative, and utterly devastating. It was not loud, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. Every head in the room snapped toward Amara. Blackwood froze mid-stride, his back still to her. He slowly, almost mechanically, turned around. His face was a mask of disbelief, his mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of her words. Amara's eyes were fixed on the screen. "The character you have chosen," she continued, her voice even and calm, "Shi Zheng Zisei, can mean correction or rectification. You are proposing to correct Mr. Tanaka's legacy. It is an insult." A collective, sharp intake of breath came from the Japanese delegation. Mr. Tanaka's lead advisor, a stern-faced man in his 60s, looked as if he had been slapped. Mr. Fuming. Tanaka himself did not react, but his eyes, which had been observing Amara with detached curiosity, now held a spark of intense, focused interest. Blackwood stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. What did you say?" "A more appropriate character," Amara said, as if explaining a simple concept to a child, "would be Yi-chan, Isan. It speaks of a heritage, a thing of value passed down. Or, if you wish to speak of a shared future, perhaps Chuan Tong, Dento, for tradition, combined with Gei Shin Kakushin, for innovation. To build a new tradition from the convergence of two great companies." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Your choice implies that one side is flawed and needs fixing. Their side." The silence that followed was different from the one before. It was no longer tense and oppressive. It was a silence of pure, unadulterated shock. Blackwood's executives stared, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. They had spent weeks with a team of consultants to select that single, impactful kanji, and this girl had just dismantled it with a few quiet sentences. Blackwood's mind reeled. His first instinct was denial, followed by a surge of white-hot fury. This was impossible. He was being contradicted, corrected, schooled by the help, in front of the very people he was trying to impress. "You looked that up," he snarled, his voice raspy. "You have an earpiece. You looked it up on your phone." He was grasping at straws, trying to find a logical explanation that would restore his sense of order. The idea that she might simply know was too threatening to contemplate. Amara met his accusation with the same unnerving calm. She slowly held up her hands, palms open. They were empty. "I do not own a phone that could perform such a search, Mr. Blackwood," she said simply. "And I have no earpiece." Her quiet dignity was more damning than any shouted defense. It laid his accusation bare for what it was, the desperate flailing of a man who had lost control. The first twist had occurred, the invisible girl had spoken, and with a few carefully chosen words, she had completely redefined her presence in the room. She was no longer just the maid's daughter. She was a mystery. And Sterling Blackwood, a man who hated mysteries he could not solve or buy, felt a primal, unfamiliar emotion creep into his heart. It was fear. The seed of fear, once planted in the fertile ground of Sterling Blackwood's ego, began to sprout with alarming speed. The foundation of his world, that wealth equated to wisdom and status to superiority, had been shaken. His immediate reaction was not introspection, but aggression. When a cornered animal is wounded, it does not surrender. It lashes out with everything it has left. Blackwood saw Amara's quiet correction not as a helpful clarification, but as a declaration of war. He interpreted her composure as arrogance, her knowledge as a weapon deployed against him. He had to reassert his dominance immediately and decisively. "So you know a few words?" he sneered, his voice regaining some of its bluster, though it now had a brittle, hollow edge. "Congratulations. You've been practicing on some language app. Very impressive." He swept his arm towards the Japanese delegation. "But this isn't a classroom, little girl. This is the real world. This is about nuance, about complexity. This is about a multi-billion-dollar global partnership." He strode to the head of the table, tapping a sequence on the integrated console. The slide with the offending kanji disappeared, replaced by a dense wall of text, a one-page executive summary of his proposal. It was a thicket of financial terminology, technical specifications, and strategic jargon, designed to be impenetrable to anyone outside his inner circle. "You think you're so clever?" he challenged, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. "You think you understand their language? Then prove it." He jabbed a finger at the screen. "Translate this, right now. For Mr. Tanaka, not just the words, the meaning, the intent. Tell him what this page says." Whoa! A wave of murmurs rippled through his own team. It was a ludicrous, impossible demand. Even a professional translator would need time to parse such a document, to find the right equivalences for complex proprietary terms. It was a test designed for failure, a public execution disguised as a challenge. Harris, his COO, started to rise, a faint protest on his lips. "Sterling, this is hardly—" "Quiet, Harris!" Blackwood snapped without looking at him. His entire focus was on Amara, a predator locking onto its prey. "Well, I'm waiting." Or was that little performance all you had? The room turned its collective gaze back to Amara. This was the moment of truth. She could refuse, and no one would blame her. She could walk away from this insane demand. But Amara saw the opportunity for what it was. It was not about her, not really. It was about the apology. It was about the years of quiet slights her mother had endured, the casual cruelties she had absorbed with unwavering professionalism. This was a chance to demand a payment on a debt of dignity. She took a slow breath, the air filling her lungs, calming the faint tremor of adrenaline. Her grandfather's words again: "Never accept a battle on your opponent's terms. Define the battlefield yourself." "I will do it," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. Blackwood's triumphant smirk began to form, but it froze on his face as she continued. "But I have a condition." He stared at her. "A condition?" he repeated, incredulous. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. "Yes," Amara affirmed, her gaze as steady as a surgeon's hand. "If I translate this summary to Mr. Tanaka's satisfaction, you will not apologize to me. You will apologize to my mother, Elena Washington. You will look her in the eye and thank her for her 20 years of loyal and impeccable service. You will acknowledge her by name and recognize her as a valuable member of your household, not as invisible help." The demand was so specific, so personal, so utterly unexpected, that it stunned the room into a fresh silence. It was a moral checkmate. To refuse would be to admit his own cruelty and fear. To accept was to stake his pride on her failure. Blackwood was trapped. He looked from Amara's resolute face to the impassive, watching eyes of Kenji Tanaka. He saw the flicker of contempt in the faces of his own executives. He was being outmaneuvered, and he knew it. A savage, reckless pride took hold. He would call her bluff. He would let her try, let her fail spectacularly, and then he would grind her into dust. A dangerous feral grin spread across his face. "Fine," he spat. "You have a deal. If you can do this, and that's a very big if, I'll throw your mother a damn parade. But when you fail, and you will fail, you will leave this building and never set foot in it again, and I'll make sure your mother is right behind you." The threat was vile, but it no longer touched her. The battlefield had been set. The terms were agreed upon. The confrontation was no longer just a test of language. It had been elevated into a trial of honor. Amara gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "I accept your terms." The test began. The wall of text on the screen pulsed with a malevolent energy, a fortress of corporate jargon designed by Sterling Blackwood to be unassailable. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with an air of smug finality. He had set the trap, and the girl had walked right into it. He envisioned her stumbling over the first sentence, her confidence dissolving into a stuttering, humiliating silence. This, he thought, would be over quickly. Amara did not look at the screen. Not yet. Her first movement was one of graceful deliberate respect. She turned to face Mr. Tanaka and his delegation. She placed her hands together, fingers straight, and executed a bow. It was not a simple nod of the head. It was a deep, formal bow, a saikurai, her back perfectly straight, her body hinging at the waist to a precise 45-degree angle. She held it for a beat longer than necessary, a silent transmission of profound respect. The effect on the Japanese delegation was immediate and profound. It was a gesture they understood in their very bones. It was the language of reigi, of proper conduct, a language more fundamental than any spoken word. Mr. Tanaka's impassive mask softened for the first time, his eyes widening slightly in acknowledgment. His advisors exchanged quick, meaningful glances. This was not the bow of a tourist or a student who had read a book. It was the bow of someone who had lived the culture, who understood its deep, flowing currents. Amara straightened, her movements fluid and unhurried. Only then did her eyes turn to the screen. She scanned the dense paragraph, her gaze moving methodically from left to right. Blackwood expected her to start translating verbatim, a robotic word-for-word recitation. He leaned forward, ready to pounce on the first mistake. But Amara did not begin with a translation. She began with a preamble, spoken in the most formal and polite form of Japanese, keigo, a level of speech reserved for expressing the highest degree of respect. "Tanaka-sama," she began, her voice resonating with a quiet authority that belied her age. "Before addressing the specifics of this document, permit me to frame its core spirit, lest the coarseness of direct translation obscure the intended message." Blackwood's limited understanding of Japanese caught only a few words, but the deferential tone was unmistakable. He frowned, a flicker of unease disturbing his confidence. This was not the approach of someone who was struggling, Amara continued, her Japanese flowing like water. This proposal at its heart is an expression of aggressive forward momentum. It prioritizes speed, disruption, and market dominance above all else. It speaks the language of acquisition, not partnership. She was not translating the words, she was interpreting the ideology embedded within them. She was reading the subtext, the cultural DNA of Blackwood's brutal business philosophy. She deliberately kept her summary broad, her pacing slow and measured. She was laying the groundwork, establishing a baseline of competence while holding the full force of her ability in reserve. To Blackwood, her slow pace sounded like hesitation. His smirk returned. "Struggling already?" he taunted in English. "I knew you couldn't do it. Too many big words for you?" Amara ignored him completely, her focus entirely on Mr. Tanaka. She moved to the first key point in the summary. Synergistic integration of supply chains. She paused, her brow furrowing slightly, not in confusion, but in consideration. "The document proposes a synergistic integration," she said in Japanese, using the English words as a quote before continuing in her flawless native tongue. "A more accurate way to convey this concept in a spirit of mutual respect would be to speak of harmonizing our pathways, ryuro no chowa. The term integration implies one stream being absorbed by another, larger one. Harmony suggests two powerful rivers flowing side by side, their currents strengthening each other as they move toward a shared sea." She was not just translating, she was elevating the language, transforming a sterile business term into a powerful, resonant metaphor that spoke directly to the Japanese aesthetic of balance and mutual respect. Mr. Tanaka's lead advisor, the stern-faced man, took out a pen and made a note on his pad. Blackwood felt another jolt of alarm. He didn't understand the specifics, but he could see the impact she was having. He could see the rapt attention on the faces of the Japanese delegation. The atmosphere in the room was changing. The power dynamic was subtly but inexorably shifting away from him, the master of the universe, and toward the quiet girl by the refreshment cart. His impatience grew, laced with a growing dread. He felt like a man watching a distant tidal wave, a beautiful and terrifying thing on the horizon, not yet comprehending that it was coming directly for him. The test had begun, but it was no longer Amara who was being tested. It was Sterling Blackwood. The midpoint had been reached, not just in the narrative of the meeting, but in the trajectory of Sterling Blackwood's life. He simply hadn't realized it yet. He was still operating under the delusion that this was his room, his deal, his world. But the control he cherished so deeply was an illusion, evaporating under the quiet, focused power of Amara's voice. Her methodical, metaphor-rich translation continued, each sentence a carefully placed stone building a bridge between two vastly different business cultures. The turning point came when she reached the section of the proposal detailing the post-merger leadership structure. It was a typically aggressive Blackwood plan. Key executive positions in the new, combined entity would be filled almost exclusively by his own people. The plan was couched in neutral language, leveraging existing leadership synergies and streamlining command protocols, but its intent was a brutal corporate conquest. Amara paused for a longer time before addressing this point. She took a half step forward, a small movement that somehow commanded the entire room's attention. She looked directly at Mr. Tanaka, her expression serious. "Tanaka-sama," she said, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate, more grave. The next section outlines the proposed leadership structure. The document, as written, suggests a hierarchy that places the wisdom and experience of your executive team in a subordinate role. She chose her words with surgical precision. While it is presented as a measure of efficiency, it could be perceived as an act of profound disrespect to the lineage of leadership that has guided your company for over a century. She then did something extraordinary. She did not just translate. She contextualized the potential offense within Japanese culture itself. "There is an old proverb," she continued, her voice resonating with the weight of ancient wisdom. "Noru ying hajwa wo ansu." The talented hawk hides its claws. It speaks to the virtue of masking one's strength, of demonstrating power through quiet competence, not aggressive displays. This proposal, in its current form, does not hide its claws. It presents them, sharpened, and suggests they are the only claws that matter. A sharp, audible gasp came from Mr. Tanaka's lead advisor. It was a sound of shock and recognition. She hadn't just quoted a proverb. She had wielded it like a shield, perfectly articulating the very offense they had all been feeling, but had been too polite to voice. The air crackled. The theoretical test had just become intensely real. For the very first time since the meeting began, Mr. Kenji Tanaka spoke. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on Amara. He did not speak in the slow, careful English he had used earlier. He spoke in his native tongue, a rapid, complex stream of Japanese, his voice sharp and incisive. "あなたは我々の会社の歴史をどれほど理解しているのですか?この提案が祖父の腹から受け継がれてきた三方よしの理念、裏給よし、価格よし、時間よしにどのように反するとお考えか、具体的に説明していただきたい." Roughly. How much do you truly understand of our company's history? I want you to explain specifically how you believe this proposal violates the Sanpo Yoshi principle, good for the seller, good for the buyer, and good for society, that has been passed down since my grandfather's generation. The question was a blade, a direct and challenging test of the depth of her understanding. It was a question no language app could answer, a query that went to the very soul of his company. Blackwood saw his opening. She would falter now. She had to. He couldn't understand the question, but he recognized the tone of a cross-examination. He leaned forward, a predatory grin playing on his lips, ready for the kill. Amara did not hesitate. She did not blink. Her response was immediate, fluid, and devastatingly eloquent. "Tanaka-sama, Your question is the very heart of the matter, she replied in the same formal, rapid Japanese. The Sanpo Yoshi philosophy is built on a foundation of holistic, long-term value for all stakeholders. This proposal, however, is structured around a philosophy of shareholder primacy, a short-term maximization of profit that inherently unbalances the three pillars. By sidelining your leadership, it silences the voice of society and the buyer, focusing only on what is good for the seller, in this case, the new controlling entity. It replaces a philosophy of sustainable harmony with one of extractive growth. It would be like taking a perfectly balanced three-legged stool, the legacy of your grandfather, and attempting to make it stand on one leg. It cannot be done without the stool and the legacy collapsing. The room was utterly, completely silent. Amara had not only answered the question, she had dissected the core philosophical conflict between the two companies with the skill of a master strategist. She had shown that she didn't just speak the language, she understood the soul behind it. Mr. Tanaka leaned back in his chair. The mask of impassivity was gone, replaced by an expression of profound, undisguised astonishment. He looked at Amara as if seeing her for the first time. And across the table, Sterling Blackwood's confidence finally, irrevocably shattered. The predatory grin melted from his face, replaced by a slack-jawed pallor. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the reaction. He understood the gasp from the advisor. He understood the look on Tanaka's face. He understood, in a sudden sickening rush of cold dread, that he was no longer in control of the room. He was no longer even a player. He was merely a spectator at his own immolation. The girl he had tried to humiliate was now the most powerful person in the area, and he had no idea how it had happened. Desperation is a corrosive acid. For Sterling Blackwood, it was now eating away the last vestiges of his composure, his authority, his very sense of self. He had been completely and utterly eclipsed. The center of gravity in the room had shifted, and he was now a forgotten moon orbiting the luminous sun that was Amara Washington. He had to do something, anything, to wrench back control. His mind, accustomed to aggression as the solution to all problems, latched onto the only thing he had left, the jargon of his own kingdom. He lunged for the console again, his movements clumsy and panicked. He fumbled for a moment before the screen changed, displaying a garish, complicated slide filled with interlocking circles, arrows, and buzzwords. At the top, in a bold, sans-serif font, were the words, Strategic Brand Synergy. "Explain that," he barked, his voice cracking with the strain. He pointed a trembling finger at the screen. That's the core of it all, our synergy. Don't give me your proverbs and your philosophy. Explain our business model. Explain the synergy. It was a pathetic last-ditch effort. He was retreating to the safety of his own corporate language, a dialect he believed she could not possibly speak. He was demanding she fight on his turf, a battlefield of meaningless marketing speak. Amara looked at the chaotic slide for a brief moment, her expression one of mild distaste, as if observing a poorly constructed piece of furniture. Then she turned away from it, dismissing it completely. The gesture was more powerful than any verbal refutation. She was communicating that his core business model was irrelevant to the real conversation that was taking place. She walked with a calm and deliberate pace to the far wall of the boardroom, a seamless expanse of white glass that doubled as a whiteboard. She picked up a black dry erase marker, the cap clicking off with a soft, definitive sound. The entire room, including Blackwood and the Japanese delegation, tracked her movement, their attention absolute. She turned not to Blackwood, but to Mr. Tanaka. "Tanaka-sama," she said, her voice soft, but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "May I be so bold as to ask for the guiding principle, the Rinnin of your esteemed company, the one word that has been its northern star since the time of your grandfather?" Mr. Tanaka considered the question for a long moment. Then he spoke a single word in Japanese. Shinrai, Shinrai. The word resonated in the air. Trust, reliability, confidence. Amara nodded slowly. She turned to the whiteboard and, with a motion that was both economical and elegant, drew a perfect circle on the right side of the board. Inside it she wrote the kanji for Shinrai. Her handwriting was not the blocky print of a novice. It was fluid, graceful, each stroke possessing a balance and energy that was breathtaking to behold. It was the handwriting of a calligrapher. Then she turned and looked at Sterling Blackwood. She did not need to ask for his company's principal. Everyone in the room knew it. It was plastered on the lobby wall, on his website, on every piece of corporate literature. She drew another circle on the left side of the board. Inside it she wrote a single word in English. Disrupt. The two words stood in stark contrast. Shinrai and disrupt, trust and disruption. One represented stability, the other chaos. One was about building, the other about breaking. Blackwood's own slide had tried to force these two concepts together with a mess of arrows and overlapping shapes. Amara did not try to force them. Instead, she began to speak as she drew. Mr. Blackwood's model is about disruption for the sake of market capture, she explained, her voice a calm narrative. Mr. Tanaka's is about building trust for the sake of societal value. She drew a line from each circle, not toward each other, but forward, in parallel. They cannot be jammed together. To do so would be to destroy the integrity of both. Her marker, which had been moving with the precision of an architect, suddenly changed. The lines she drew became softer, more organic. She began to sketch a third space, a connecting channel between the two parallel paths. It was not a merger, it was a confluence. A true partnership, she said, her voice filled with a quiet passion, does not seek to force synergy. It seeks to create a new space where two different philosophies can create a third shared principle. She sketched the image of a bridge, its foundations firmly planted on both banks. It is not about disruption. It is not even just about trust. It is about building trustworthy innovation. Washpower. She wrote the new concept in the middle of the bridge, first in English, and then below it she composed the Japanese equivalent on the spot, combining characters with an intuitive poetic logic. Shinrai dege shin, Shinrai teki kakushin. She was no longer translating a document. She was authoring a new strategy. She was mediating a cultural and philosophical chasm with a whiteboard marker and a profound understanding of two worlds. The marker moved in her hand, not like a pen, but like a feud, a calligraphy brush, each stroke imbued with meaning and intent. The desperate final push from Blackwood had not cornered her. It had liberated her, allowing her to transcend the role of translator and assume the mantle of a visionary. The room was no longer a boardroom. It had become her classroom, her canvas, her stage. Amara placed the cap back on the marker. The soft click echoed in the tomb-like silence of the eyrie. She turned from the whiteboard, her elegant diagram of a possible future hanging in the air like a new constitution. Her gaze settled once more on Mr. Tanaka, and she took a small, respectful step forward. The climax was at hand. The full, undeniable extent of her mastery was about to be unleashed. She began to speak, and the Japanese that flowed from her lips was of a different quality than before. The formal, precise keigo of the translator was gone, replaced by something richer, more resonant, more profound. It was the language of poets and philosophers imbued with a deep, personal conviction. "Tanaka-sama," she began, her voice a quiet symphony, "forgive my presumption. We have spoken of business, of strategy, of synergy, but these are merely the vessels. The true substance of any great enterprise is not found in its balance sheets, but in its heart. It is the story it tells across generations." She spoke of his company not as a corporation, but as a living entity, a legacy of honor. She referenced the cherry blossom trees his grandfather had planted at their first factory, a symbol of the beauty and transience of life, and a reminder to conduct business with an eye toward things that endure. She spoke of the company's commitment to its employees during the economic downturn of the 90s, a decision that prioritized loyalty over profits and, in doing so, forged a bond of unbreakable trust, Shinrai. The technology offered by Mr. Blackwood's company is powerful, she acknowledged, her voice weaving a narrative that was both respectful and honest. It is a sharp and swift blade. In the hands of a surgeon, such a blade can bring healing and life. But in the hands of one who does not understand the sanctity of the body, it can bring only destruction. The question is not about the sharpness of the blade, but about the spirit of the one who wields it. Her words painted a vivid picture, transforming the abstract deal into a moral choice. She was no longer just a bridge between languages, she was a bridge between eras, connecting the deep-rooted traditions of Tanaka's world with the fast-moving, often soulless, innovation of Blackwood's. Then she concluded, her voice softening to an almost reverential whisper. She looked toward the vast window at the sky beyond the city. Your journey here to this room on this day reminds me of a poem, she said, and she recited from memory the most famous haiku by Matsuo Basho. Furu ikeya, an old silent pond. Kawazu tobikomu. A frog jumps into the pond. Mizu no oto. Splash! Silence again. She let the final syllable hang in the air. This meeting, she interpreted, her voice barely audible, is the old pond, silent, ancient, full of history. The partnership is the frog, a new element, a leap into the unknown. The question you must ask, Tanaka-sama, is whether the splash will be one that creates ripples of harmony or one that muddies the water for generations to come. The speech was over. It had lasted perhaps 2 minutes, but in that time, Amara had completely remade the world within the 4 glass walls of the Eyrie. She had transformed a hostile negotiation into a philosophical meditation. She had appealed not to greed or ambition, but to honor, legacy, and wisdom. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence of awe. Leo, the waiter, stood frozen in the doorway, tears welling in his eyes, though he knew not why. Blackwood's executives stared at her, their faces slack with a wonder that bordered on fear. Sterling Blackwood himself was a statue of gray stone, his face bloodless, his eyes vacant. He had been so comprehensively, so elegantly, so utterly defeated that there was nothing left of him. Slowly, deliberately, Mr. Kenji Tanaka pushed back his chair and rose to his feet. The movement was measured, imbued with a profound sense of occasion. He did not look at Blackwood. He did not look at his own delegation. He looked only at Amara. The entire room held its breath. The climax was not a shout, but a gesture. It was a moment of profound, world-altering stillness. The frog had jumped. The splash had been made, and now there was only the silence that followed. Mr. Kenji Tanaka stood at his full, though not imposing height. His presence, however, filled the room. He faced Amara Washington across the vast, sterile expanse of the obsidian table. He brought his hands together, just as she had done, and then he bowed. It was not the perfunctory nod of a Western businessman. It was the same deep, respectful saikirei she had offered him, a gesture of profound deference and acknowledgment from a titan of industry to the daughter of a maid. When he straightened, he spoke. And for the first time, he addressed the entire room in clear, formal English. His voice was calm, but it carried the indisputable weight of finality. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said, his words directed solely at Amara. The statement landed, and for a moment it created only confusion. Blackwood's team exchanged bewildered glances. Grandfather? What grandfather? Mr. Tanaka's eyes held Amara's, a silent communication passing between them. Ambassador Charles Washington was a great man, he announced to the stunned room. A true friend to my country and a dear friend to my family. I had the honor of meeting him several times when I was a young man, accompanying my own father. He was a man who understood that diplomacy was not about treaties, but about understanding, not about language, but about heart. A wave of shock, a palpable physical thing, rolled through the Eyrie. The name Ambassador Charles Washington resonated with the force of history. He was a diplomatic legend, a key figure in post-war U.S.-Japan relations, a scholar of Eastern art and philosophy, a man renowned for his wisdom and integrity. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with dizzying speed. The composure, the discipline, the impossible fluency, the calligraphic handwriting, the deep cultural understanding. It was not learned from an app. It was inherited. It was a legacy. Amara's hand went to her pocket, her fingers closing around the worn wooden netsuke of the crane, the gift from the grandfather who had raised her in a world of quiet contemplation and cultural reverence after her father passed away. He had taught her that her greatest strength would be the ability to see the world through the eyes of others. Rapast. Tanaka continued, his gaze finally shifting, moving like a slow-moving glacier to settle upon the pale, trembling form of Sterling Blackwood. The warmth in his voice vanished, replaced by an Arctic chill. "The deal is off, Mr. Blackwood," he stated. The words were quiet, but they were a death sentence. "We do not partner with men who are blind. We do not partner with men who cannot see the garden for the weeds at their feet." He paused, letting the condemnation sink in. "Today, you had in your presence a treasure, a living bridge between our two cultures, and you treated her like dust." The public humiliation was absolute. Blackwood visibly deflated, the last of his bluster and arrogance draining away, leaving behind a shrunken, pathetic figure. The faces of his own board members seated at the table were masks of cold fury and contempt. He had not just lost a deal. He had disgraced them all. He had revealed the rotten core of the company's culture, and he had done it on the biggest stage imaginable. Mr. Tanaka turned his back on Blackwood. A final, complete dismissal. He addressed Amara once more. "Miss Washington," he said, his tone warm again, "my company is expanding its operations in North America. We are in need of a cultural liaison, someone to guide us, to ensure we proceed with wisdom and respect. The position would report directly to me. It is yours, if you would have it." The social order of the room had not just been shaken, it had been completely inverted. The invisible girl had been elevated to the highest echelon. The master of the universe had been cast out. The onlookers, once complicit in their silence, now stared at Amara with a mixture of reverence and shame. Amara inclined her head, a gesture of quiet gratitude. The apology she had demanded from Blackwood was now meaningless, a petty prize from a bankrupt king. She had won something far greater. She had honored her grandfather's memory, she had defended her mother's dignity, and she had, in the space of an afternoon, defined her own future on her own terms. The revelation was complete. The reordering had begun. The aftermath in the Eyrie was a study in quiet efficiency. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. Sterling Blackwood's empire did not end with a bang, but with the quiet click of a door. Two members of his own security team, summoned by a discreet text from the lead board member, entered the room. They flanked Blackwood, their faces impassive. There was a brief, murmured exchange, and then the man who had built the tower was escorted from his own penthouse boardroom like a common trespasser. He did not look back. His footsteps, for the first time, were silent on the marble floor. He left behind a legacy, but it was not the one he had envisioned. It was a legacy of ruin, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms for years to come. As the door closed, a collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the remaining executives. The oppressive atmosphere created by Blackwood's tyranny had lifted. They looked at each other, then at Amara, their expressions a complex mix of embarrassment, respect, and dawning hope. The woman in the pearl-gray suit, the one who had flinched at Blackwood's cruelty, approached Amara. "On behalf of the board, Miss Washington," she said, her voice sincere, "we are profoundly sorry and deeply impressed." The Japanese delegation, their business concluded, now surrounded Amara. They no longer saw a young woman in a simple dress. They saw the heir to a great legacy, a kindred spirit. They spoke to her in warm, respectful Japanese, bowing, thanking her, their faces alight with genuine admiration. Mr. Tanaka stood beside her, a benevolent, paternal presence. From the doorway, Leo, the waiter, finally found the courage to move. He walked tentatively toward the group, holding a silver tray with a single glass of water, a humble offering in a room where billions had just been lost and a future had just been won. He stopped before Amara. "Miss," he said, his voice trembling slightly, That was the bravest thing I have ever seen." Amara turned to him, and the formal, serious expression she had worn throughout the ordeal melted away, replaced by a warm, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. "Thank you, Leo," she said, using his name. He was stunned that she had even noticed him, let alone remembered his name tag. In that moment he understood the difference between the false power of Blackwood, which sought to make others feel small, and the true strength of Amara, which effortlessly acknowledged the humanity in everyone. Amara then turned back to Mr. Tanaka. "Tanaka-sama," she said in English, for all to hear, "I am honored by your generous offer, and I accept." She paused, a thoughtful look on her face. "But I, too, have a condition." A hush fell. Mr. Tanaka raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Indeed?" "Yes," Amara said firmly. "My first official act as your cultural liaison must be to secure a generous and immediate retirement package for my mother, Elena Washington, one that recognizes her 20 years of flawless service and allows her to rest and pursue her own dreams, free from financial worry." Mr. Tanaka's smile broadened. He nodded without a moment's hesitation. "It is done," he said. "Consider it a signing bonus. A company that does not honor the service of a mother cannot be worthy of the talents of her daughter. We will have the paperwork drawn up this afternoon." The reordering was complete. The kind observer, Leo, was seen and validated. The skeptical authority, Mr. Tanaka, had become a reverent mentor. The cruel antagonist was deposed. And the quiet master, Amara, had not only vindicated herself, but had used her newfound power to reward the person whose quiet dignity had been her lifelong inspiration. She walked to the immense window and looked out at the sprawling city below. An hour ago, she had been an invisible girl in a billionaire's tower, a silent witness to a world she was not a part of. Now the city seemed to spread before her, not as an imposing landscape of power and wealth, but as a place of infinite possibility. She was no longer just an observer. She was a builder of bridges, a translator of hearts, a guardian of a legacy. She touched the wooden crane in her pocket. Her grandfather had taught her well. True worth is not in the noise you make, but in the quiet, indelible mark you leave on the world. It is a lesson whispered in the space between words, a truth that echoes long after the shouting has faded. Have you ever witnessed someone's hidden talent shine through in an unexpected moment? Share your story in the comments below. Your experiences inspire us all. And for more tales of quiet strength overcoming loud arrogance, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel.